It's the Sod Pod, brought to you by Grassland Agro. The Sod Pod. Hello, and welcome to episode 18 of the Sod Pod. In the last episode, Davey and Johnny headed off with the gear down to Johnstown Castle and spoke to some great people. If you haven't heard it already, I'd advise you to go back and have a listen. And in this episode, we're delighted to be joined by Conor Quinlan, Dairy Hygiene Manager with Grassland Agro. Conor, welcome on the show. Just give us a quick rundown, Conor, of your role in Grassland Agro and the sort of things you're seeing in the dairy industry.
Yeah, thanks, James. I suppose my role, I'd be mainly dealing with the merchants that we're involved with throughout the country and also the milk quality teams across the different co-ops that we're involved with. So it's mainly looking at the different issues on the dairy wash systems and ensuring that milk quality is maintained with all the co-ops.
What sort of issues are current now at the moment, actually, Conor?
There's always issues, I suppose, but the main issues that we're probably seeing out of this summer, particularly for the last couple of summers, is TBC and Thermoduric issues coming that you're seeing in different areas across the country. I suppose that there's challenges there since we've come chlorine free in the last number of years with the different co-ops at different stages. But a lot of the issues are fairly simply rectified and are solved with seeing some of the individuals that are out there on farm.
But it's fairly unique, Conor, the fact that we are chlorine free because we have that mainly export high value infant formula dried product, whereas we met a supplier of dairy hygiene products in the UK, and I think they have chlorine options as well that is sometimes used over there, whereas we're kind of maybe ahead of the curve. Is that fair to say? Or
yeah, I think we're only one of the only countries, ourselves and Denmark, that have gone nearly fully chlorine free now. There'll be other co-ops or other processors throughout Europe that have chlorine free options, but we're definitely a leader in terms of the whole chlorine free side, both in Europe and worldwide, I believe. So it brings its own challenges, but it's great as well because we're ensuring that our milk being exported is of the highest quality and is there to basically get into different marketplaces with our product and is seen as a premium product as well.
Yeah, it's very exciting to think that we have such a unique product from how we produce it from a grass-based system, and also, you know, that side of it, which I probably wasn't as aware of until I joined Grassland Agro and really got stuck into the dairy hygiene as well. But your role, Conor, I suppose you have a team that you work with as well, and they very much spend a lot of time on farm.
Yeah, so we'd have dairy hygiene specialists that will call out to farms most days and see what they're doing on farm and basically solve individual problems that are happening. I suppose the issues that we'd have most summers is because of high temperatures, and that's where you get bacterial growth between milkings and milking lines or in bulk tanks. And our dairy hygiene team will basically help in meeting some of them challenges that are happening on individual farms and basically find solutions for them farms, because as we all know, the one solution doesn't fit all farms, so definitely we have to find different solutions there on farm and discover the issues that are there.
And the dairy hygiene team, Conor, they're obviously selling product, but they're advising farmers and helping them overcome those issues, and like the Thermodurics and TBC, like it can be overcome with managing products correctly, even, you know. And I know chlorine is gone, but there are products there that will and are overcoming that issue, but it's get a better understanding of how they're working. Yeah,
so I suppose that since chlorine is left, you're trying to look for replacements of it, and essentially what you're trying to do is use higher level of caustics and more regular use of descalers. And then the challenge with that is the descalers effect on rubberware and all that in milking machines. But yeah, oftentimes you can get them challenges that are on farm that maybe chlorine before was hiding with sterilization. So you're looking at using more of the likes of paracetic acids and all this on farm. It's often the simple stuff that trip people up when it comes to milk quality issues. It's just a routine that has skewed off in a direction that it probably shouldn't have had, or maybe not using correct amount of detergents or acids, or not using enough hot water. Hot water is a big issue as well on an awful lot of farms. So it's as important, if not more important, as the acids and caustics you're using, is having that hot water available. this common phrase that's being used is you can't clean a butter dish with cold water. So you
do all the cleaning at home, obviously, from that expert knowledge.
Put it on the hot wash in the dishwasher and away you go. Put it on the 70-degree wash.
Yeah. And Conor, I suppose like there's probably, maybe there's some people here who listen to the podcast who are milking, and sometimes they actually listen to the podcast while they are actually physically milking. What is the most common maybe place that you see dairy farmers fall down in relation to milk quality other than the water? Or what's the biggest cause of high cell count that you see during a milking routine on farm that maybe some guys could pick up on?
Yeah, there's the basic simple wash principles that are out there. I suppose from a cell count point of view, it's all the basics that have probably been said umpteen times. The use of gloves, properly preparing the cow. Oftentimes that isn't practical on some farms with the numbers they have now, but if they are spraying the cows beforehand or washing teats to make sure that they dry so to stop any risk of infection. So mainly the cell count issue, nearly every farm at some stage, whether it's every year or every couple of months or what it is, they'll get an outbreak of some sort of cell count, and it's just controlling that infection as much as we can. So the principles that John has been asking there is effectively stopping the spread of any of that. So it's the use of the likes of cluster flush properly as opposed to cluster dipping that could nearly spread more infection if not done correctly. So
what's one of the issues there? Because I would have always thought cluster dipping was a good way to go, but I was talking to a man recently and he was saying that some of the problems, so why for a guy that is cluster dipping today, why can that cause an issue?
Yeah, so cluster dipping, I suppose for anyone that isn't familiar with it, it's basically dipping the clusters into a bucket of sterilized water with peracetic acid, and it's stopping the spread of infection from the cow that has just been milked onto the next cow, because you can spread the infection for up to 4 milkings after that one infected cow. So what you're trying to do is minimize the infection. The fear is that after a certain amount of time that peracetic acid might render ineffective, or too much dirt is getting into the clusters
from each dip,
or the water isn't actually getting up into the clusters. So proper cluster flushing, whether that's a DIY job or an actual retrofit system going in, it can be very effective to properly sterilize the liners before the milk again.
And even before all that, Conor, like I know, like Joe, you talk about preventing it and that, but like the cow herself, like having her in good order and not much stress and all that, like she could potentially overcome a lot of those issues herself, like, before you actually get into using products and that.
Yeah, like look, our dairy cow can be under enough stress as it is. At the end of the day, she has to calf down once a year, get back into calf, and also produce an awful lot more litres than what she would have if she was out in the wild. So we're asking that cow to do an awful lot and making sure that she's in the right plane of nutrition and getting back up in order to be in calf again within 8 to 10 weeks or cycling again. It's very important that they're on a good level of condition and that they have good body condition, because it affects everything else. It can affect lameness, which again is another stressor on a cow. So all these things will have an effect on the cow and can come out in something like cell count. No more than any of us, if we get run down or anything like that, we might get a cold sore or something. So things like that can have effect if we're stressing the cow.
And Conor, we actually have a few people who are not dairy farms, so like to maybe make it simple, what is this SCC or this cell count that maybe the beef farmers always hear the dairy farmers talking about, and they're thinking, what are these lunatics on about?
Yeah, so cell count SCC is basically somatic cell count, and it's basically a count of the white blood cells in the cow's milk, and it measures the level of infection that's there, or it's an indicator of a level of infection that's there. So in a lot of cases, cell count, once a farmer gets an elevated reading in cell count, it'll indicate to them that there's a number of cases of mastitis in the herd, and often that farmer will strip the cow's teats. So check it before they start to milk to make sure that if there's any clods or anything like that to show signs of mastitis. So the cell count is a kind of an indicator of mastitis in the herd generally, and so it's a good indicator to keep an eye on for farmers that if they have a relatively consistent cell count and then it gets elevated, to check it out. So often you'd see cell counts would be kind of mid 150,000, and if they get elevated then up to 200,000, a farmer needs to go in and check.
And there's an economic cost of that as well, isn't there?
Yeah,
Like,
so
just
most
in the-
co-ops
for the
will
pocket,
have
like.
different measures, but there's a carrot and stick with most of the co-ops with the likes of cell count, but you're generally talking above 300,000 and you'll start to see fines. So
Yeah, but and even a case of severe mastitis, like you could potentially lose a quarter or lose a cow, or and that big cost on the farmer.
yeah, it is, and it's a nuisance as much as anything else, and they have to go, and it takes an awful lot of time, farmers' time, and a certain amount of money to help solve these issues as well. So what we're all trying to achieve, both the farmer and the likes of ourselves in Grassland, is preventative and trying to prevent these issues of mastitis. I suppose it's well known that teat spraying, post-teat spraying alone with effective teat spray can reduce mastitis infections within the herd by up to 50%. So we know some of the basic measures to help reduce infections, and that's what we're just trying to achieve, is basically minimise the amount of spread of the infections of these cases of mastitis throughout the year or throughout the lactation of the cow.
And Conor, when we see that spike in the TBCs, often a quick indicator there, okay, we need to relook at our wash routine or whatever and see what's missing is causing a bit of a spike. Thermodurics, another form of bacteria, but obviously it's the heat-resistant one. What sort of stuff would you look at there, or where would be your quick go-tos that could help to solve a Thermodurics issue?
Yeah, again, you're looking at the basics again with your wash routine, making sure there's the adequate washes are there in the weekly routine, and they're doing adequate hot, acid and caustic washes. They're easy checks to do, and on water temperature. You're also looking at liners as a big issue that can affect it as well. Oftentimes you'll see these Thermodurics problems happening during the midsummer months when temperatures are high, and effectively all these things, bacteria are coming from the outside into the milking parlour. So if we take the milking parlour as a closed unit, the only area of infection is that teat coming, that's getting onto the liner, that's causing the infection. So we need to make sure that we're stopping that spread of risk on the cow, and also to make sure that the rubberware is replaced regularly enough, not just only the liners but all the rubberware, because them crevices that can be created after 2,000 milkings on the liners, for instance, they can harbour the likes of Thermodurics and hold them
And
in.
these crevices, they're often micro crevices. They're not actually eye visible as well, as can be the case.
Yeah, they're not, and that's also, it's trying to convince a farmer that nearly after 2,000 milkings, yes, stop dead, change liners and start again. Even if they feel smooth to the touch or anything, that they can still cause problems, because that is pulsating on every milking as well. So that rubberware is being used quite hard on the liners.
Well, it's like any farmer that's listening to this, they look down at their hands and they're probably have a bit more miles in the clock than us here sitting inside in a warm office, like, so it's the chapped hands or the cracked skin, and even within the particular sod pod here, you can see these have done a bit of work, whereas you see the pianist there over with Corbin and the L'Oreal hand model yourself, Conor. But
piano pushers and piano players.
Yeah. But like, that's a big thing. It's a good way of thinking about it. If you have the degradation of the rubberware, you have those micro pores and cracks, and that's when the bacteria gets in and can cause you a hassle. That's a fair synopsis, probably, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's just keeping with simple principles and changing them regularly and assessing that each time. And it's good practice anyway, even if it's beyond, even if you're not getting necessarily TVC or Thermodurics, you don't want these issues happening to you, because the likes of Thermodurics isn't getting tested regularly. So it's not something like cell count that you can be checking a number of times a week with each collection. So we want to make sure that we're on top of it before it becomes a problem, rather than reacting when they already get a high reading. So trust me, keep these levels down as much as you can, rather than trying to solve it when they do start to increase, because they can just become more problematic and prolonged then when the levels get elevated. I suppose onto your cracked hands theory as well, we'd be using that analogy as well when we're talking about the condition of the teats and the effectiveness of it. So like, another area that we're involved with is the teat disinfection. So we have a number of teat sprays that are out there and that we have on the market, and effectively teat sprays do two roles. They serve to help disinfect and also to help with teat condition and improve the teat condition of the cow. So like John's cracked hands here, what we want is the cow's teats to be like David's hands, so nice and smooth.
Yes. Soft.
Yeah, so why we want that is why we want that is that we want the teats to be as smooth as possible, so it doesn't cause any irritation on the cow when she's being milked. And as well as that it's much easier to clean that teat, and that it doesn't harbour any bacterias, and it's that smooth surface that's easy to clean. So David should only take about 10 seconds to clean his hands.
David has been thinking there for the last 60 seconons of some smart answer to come back at you. Okay. The cogs have been turning here. It's unfortunate we don't have a video.
I won't even get into it now because I just have no backup here at all.
Started on the back foot there, Davey, so...
But just even on the transit, like, you know, as you're going into the shoulders as well, like there's probably more of an issue there with teat health. You know, just, you know, when you're in housing, maybe 50% of the time is in housing, and cubicles have an issue as well with, you know, lime on cubicles, and that kind of an issue with dry teats and that. So and that might be one going forward as well, just as we head further into the back end of the year.
Yeah, so like, look, weather has been great up to now in terms of dry. Well, too good in a lot of cases, but like it's been relatively dry weather and not hard on skin condition if we're just talking about teats. And but as we head now into October, November, we're going to get more wet, colder weather and harsher winds, and that's going to dry out teats. And then once we start to go in cubicles, in a lot of cases, people be using lime, and lime is generally high in pH and will have a drying effect. So that affects teats. It's good to reduce bacterial counts, but it also affects the teats, as in it dries it out, like what Dave was saying, and it kind of hardens them as well, and possibly more of a risk of being chapped. So
yeah, but for a lot of farmers, I tell you, like the risks of using lime themselves in relation to getting eye contamination or how hard it is on their own skin. And it's much the same then for the teat of the cow, which is very, very sensitive as well. So
yeah, there
is challenges. There's more pressure, as you said, Dave and Conor, and I suppose it is something that we're probably facing down the barrel because from a sustainability point of view, Conor, we speak a lot in the sod pod about the soil and fertilizer and emissions and fertilizer reductions, but the selective dry cow therapy and antimicrobial resistance is a huge, huge challenge that we're facing.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. It's
and you're going to solve it in the next 5 minutes.
I wish I'd be a billionaire if I was, but or if I could.
You are already, sure.
No, but it is going to be a huge problem, and the big problem I see is that we could potentially have higher involuntary cull rates with herds, as we'll have to cull them more younger and younger now if they start getting more mastitis issues. So, like, yes, selective dry cow will be good to minimise or to certainly reduce resistance, but it's not without its challenges. And I think a lot of guys have to be very careful on how they do selective dry cow and manage that. But also us as an industry, that we have some of the solutions to help with that and help to minimise that risk, because we have to make sure that we're not having all this involuntary culling as well of herds, that we can do selective dry cow on the vast majority of dairy farms quite successfully and have cows staying within the herd for a number of lactations.
Just go back there 1 second, Conor, because there's a lot of talk about selective dry cow therapy in the last number of years. What actually is it?
Yeah, so I suppose what has been happening before is farmers have been using their dry cow tube, which is an antibiotic for all their herds. So if you have a herd of 100 cows, you're using that now, or you were using that in the past on all your herd, broad spectrum. But what we want to do now with selective dry cow is to identify the cows that need the antibiotic tube or the dry cow tube the most, and identify cows that don't necessarily need it. So it helps to minimise the use of antibiotics basically on farm. And that's with the help of milk recording to identify them cows that have had issues with mastitis throughout the year, or cows that haven't had any issues. But it's about doing it responsibly as well with selective dry cow.
And information is going to be key, Conor, isn't it? Like, as John said, no more than talking about fertiliser and fertiliser planning and that, using that milk recording and been fairly stringent with it. And
Yeah, planning is going to be key. Like I firmly believe farmers are going to have to start thinking about it a lot more and identify their cows much earlier now for drying off. Maybe put in a plan in place from a dietary point of view that week beforehand, and just put a bit more emphasis on the dry cow. That dry cow week, 10 days when they're drying off, because that week at drying off, the 2 weeks before calving and about the 6 weeks after calving, them 8 or 9 weeks are the most highest weeks of risk of mastitis that they have. So if we can manage them 9 weeks out of the 52 of the year better, then we'll go a long way in reducing the amount of mastitis in herds. And that's just investing, sadly, time and money into something like this and putting a lot more thought on farm about how we're going to manage this better. But it's about each individual farmer having that discussion with the relevant stakeholders around him, whether that's his vet, whoever he or she's advisor is, to help with that, and to have that plan in place well in advance.
Yeah, that's it. We need to be thinking about this a little bit more. It's not just heading down to the co-op or the vet and trying to get the scripts for tubes and stuff like that. We need to be much more prepared and how we go about it, and much more diligent. And that's something that you've actually worked on a lot internally, and something that you always talk to us about in relation to maybe having a kit and a pack prepared there and using the right products as well, and maybe an extra layer of protection.
Yeah, that's a nice segue, John. Yeah,
some say that was premeditated, Conor.
Yeah, I suppose. Like I'm a big believer that there's products that haven't been invented yet that are going to be mainstays on farm in a very short period of time, because we're all looking for new solutions to new problems that we're all having. So the likes of the T-Hex is a kind of a teat barrier that we're looking at specifically for that week after drying off and that 2 weeks before calving. So it's basically a teat barrier that goes, you dip the teat, it forms a barrier around the outside of the teat to minimize any infection getting in on that teat. So like any of these type of products, no more than with your internal sealer or with your dry cow tube, its effectiveness is only as good as how it's being used. So the likes of the T-Hex and the pack we brought in was help to make sure that the farmers had all the tools they needed to dry cows off as best as they possibly can to minimize any infection and have that teat as sterile as possible. So that was the idea of the pack, so that the farmer has all the products available to him. So it's cotton wool wipes, it's methylated spirits, it's a dipping cup, and the T-Hex as well, basically to have it all in the one pack that's convenient for a farmer, and he can pack it up again the next time. So he does 20% of his herd this week and he might do another 20 following week. And that's the idea of these packs, is to make sure that the farmers are doing the best job as they possibly can to dry off the cows, not only just that day but also for that week after drying off, and in particular that 2 weeks just before calving.
They're the critical ones really, aren't they? Yeah,
so like the big issue as well is that as that teat canal starts to open again, is that 2 weeks before calving when she's springing up. We need to make sure that we're stopping any infection or minimizing any infection as much as possible. So the likes of the T-Hex can be used at drying off and then again just before calving, and some lads find it quite effective in help training the heifers as well.
Yeah, that was a big one, like train the heifers, that it's not as, because you see maybe some lads teat sealing heifers and you can do more harm than good if you don't get it right. But Conor, there was one last thing I wanted to ask you about. You retired Tip's greatest ever footballer, Declan Brown. Would you want to give the listeners the context of that actual story?
There's nothing to the story, really.
So the last time you ever kicked a football for Tip, you were lined up beside him. Is that true or false? Sorry.
I was in the dressing room at the time, but there's no real truth to that. I was a little minion. I think everyone was as shocked as anyone else to hear of Declan Brown, the legend, retiring. So, yeah, he was one of the great ones.
When he seen what was coming behind him, he just said, oh, this is a waste of time. You were the straw that broke the camel's back after all the years he soldiered with him.
Very brief.
Yeah.
And the blue and gold.
Well, Conor, yeah, that's a brilliant roundup. I think we'll definitely have to come back to some of that, because this is a heavy subject, like, you know, and this is very important information for all our dairy farmers that are listening over the next couple of months. And I think if anyone has any particular subject matter that they want to get in touch on this particular area, to get in touch with the Sod Pod, get in touch with James, and we can get Conor back on, and maybe even Brendan Dillon, the great West Cork man, uncle of the Cahalan hurlers, actually. So we can get him get him on to chat to us. So,
Conor, thanks for coming on. It was great insight into chlorine free and TBCs and Thermodurics and SDCTs and drying off and the whole lot. So I'm going well at learning off a pile of letters here. Just for everybody, Conor Quinlan, our Dairy Hygiene Manager, managing a team of expert advisors up and down the country of Ireland. Conor, thanks very much.
Thanks, James.
Mind yourself out there. Farm smart, farm safe. Hey, thanks for listening to the Sod Pod. We hope you enjoyed it. To find out more, head over to www.grasslandagro.ie or check out our social channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. That's all for this episode. See you next time.